The air was thick with the scent of dust and sweat, mingled with the faint aroma of freshly baked bread. Somewhere in the distance, the clatter of a blacksmith hammering iron echoed through the narrow, winding streets, while the chatter of market sellers blended with the cries of children weaving between the crowd. It was a city alive with movement, yet its pulse was not measured in grandeur or marble columns, it was measured in the quiet, intimate moments of survival, ambition, and fear. This was not the Rome that history books celebrate. There were no triumphant statues, no endless processions of emperors basking in glory. Here, 3,000 years ago, life was raw, precarious, and startlingly human. A young boy ran barefoot across uneven cobblestones, a cracked clay jug clutched in his arms, dodging an elderly woman struggling with a basket of vegetables. A merchant argued with a customer over the price of dried fish, his face flushed with irritation and fear that the day's earnings would not be enough to feed his family. Somewhere behind closed shutters, a woman whispered prayers to the household gods, hoping for protection against sickness and misfortune, while a man crouched in shadow watched the streets with wary eyes, guarding secrets only he could comprehend. Every face told a story, of hunger, desire, hope, and dread, but most of these stories would vanish without a trace, swallowed by time and dust. And yet, fragments survived. A small amphora discarded in a refuse heap, its surface etched with symbols long forgotten. A broken sandal, a fragment of a woven tunic, the charred remains of a hearth where a family once gathered. Each artifact whispered tantalizing clues of the lives once lived here, ordinary yet extraordinary in their complexity. These remnants suggested something unexpected, that behind the monumental temples and sprawling villas, there existed a world of ordinary people navigating danger, ambition, and the fragile equilibrium of daily existence. We can imagine them, the blacksmith whose hands bore permanent scars, yet whose laughter occasionally echoed above the clang of hammer on metal. The innkeeper who carefully counted each coin, each morsel of grain, aware that one misstep could mean ruin. The street urchin who scavenged refuse not merely for survival but for tiny victories in a world that offered little mercy. Their lives were intertwined, bound by commerce, loyalty, fear, and secret desires. And each day, each small choice, carried weight, a misjudged step in the marketplace, an overheard whisper in an alley, a hand extended in trust or betrayal. It was here, in the shadows of these narrow streets and cluttered courtyards, that the true pulse of Rome could be felt, not in monuments, not in the pomp of emperors, but in the silent dramas unfolding beneath the gaze of stone gods. And yet, as these echoes of ordinary life linger in fragments, a question emerges, subtle but insistent: what truths have been lost forever? What hidden fears, hidden desires, hidden dangers shaped the rhythm of their lives? And could a single artifact, a worn amphora, a stray token of someone's forgotten existence, reveal more than even the most lavish history could tell? In the quiet anticipation of discovery, one senses that every corner of the city holds a secret, every glance exchanged in the marketplace could hint at a story untold. Life 3,000 years ago was both astonishingly ordinary and inexplicably dangerous, and somewhere within these echoes lies a truth waiting to be unearthed, a truth that challenges everything we think we know about the daily lives of ancient Romans. The streets of the city twisted and turned like the veins of a living organism, carrying life, ambition, and danger to every corner. Sunlight fell unevenly, filtered through overhanging balconies and awnings, casting patterns of light and shadow across cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic. In the bustling marketplaces, vendors shouted above one another, their voices sharp with urgency as they hawked olives, dried fish, and bundles of fragrant herbs. The air was thick with the smells of roasting meat, fresh bread, and unwashed bodies, mingling into a scent that was at once familiar and unsettling to those who called these streets home. Here, ordinary Romans moved with purpose, each carrying burdens of survival, expectation, and hidden fear. A woman, her hands calloused from years of grinding grain, navigated the crowded lanes with a basket balanced precariously on her hip. Her eyes darted nervously toward a group of men arguing over the price of wool, and then down at her child's small hand clutching hers. For the plebeians, the common citizens of Rome, life was a constant negotiation with the unpredictable rhythms of fortune. Each day brought small victories, a loaf of bread bought at a fair price, a neighbor's favor returned, a coin earned through honest labor. Yet, beneath these moments of ordinary existence lingered an undercurrent of tension, a reminder that the same streets that offered opportunity could just as easily deliver ruin. In the insulae, the towering apartment blocks of stone and timber, families lived cramped together in spaces barely large enough to contain them. The upper floors were hot and precarious, their wooden beams groaning under the weight of generations. A young scribe sat in a dim corner, scratching symbols onto a wax tablet, careful not to disturb the mother rocking her infant to sleep. Below, a potter's apprentice labored in a tiny courtyard, shaping clay with careful, precise motions as sweat dripped into the grooves of his work. The rhythms of their lives were punctuated by the clamor of the streets, the distant sound of cart wheels, and the occasional shout from a neighbor warning of misfortune. Yet each individual existed not in isolation but as part of a fragile web, where one misstep by any could ripple outward, affecting many. Even in these ordinary spaces, danger lurked in subtle forms. Pickpockets slinked through shadows, their nimble fingers stealing purses, coins, and the occasional unattended loaf of bread. Fires, a constant threat in the dense wooden structures, could erupt in an instant, consuming everything in their path before neighbors could react. Disease spread quietly, often unnoticed until it struck, leaving households decimated and whispered rumors of curses or divine displeasure in its wake. In this environment, survival required vigilance, cunning, and sometimes, an unspoken willingness to bend the rules of morality just enough to protect oneself or one's family. Yet life in the city was not entirely defined by hardship. Music floated from open windows as children danced in the narrow alleys, their laughter echoing off stone walls. Merchants traded with careful negotiation, sometimes laughing heartily when a deal was struck to mutual satisfaction. Priests and priestesses moved through the streets in ceremonial garb, their chants both comforting and intimidating to passers-by. Even in these fleeting moments of joy, however, the shadows of anxiety and the ever-present risk of misfortune never fully vanished, casting a quiet, constant tension over every interaction. Among the residents, certain figures stood out as emblematic of the city's hidden stories. The butcher, whose hands were perpetually slick with blood, bore a heavy heart beneath his coarse exterior, quietly mourning a daughter taken by illness. A seamstress worked tirelessly by candlelight, stitching garments for wealthy patricians, all the while secretly learning of her employer's intrigues and hidden debts. A street urchin scavenged refuse not only for food but for trinkets and information, his sharp eyes missing nothing, quietly weaving himself into the city's hidden fabric of secrets. Each person's life intersected with others in ways both visible and imperceptible, creating a dense tapestry of human experience where the ordinary and extraordinary coexisted. Markets, streets, and apartment blocks were only part of the story. The city's peripheries, quiet courtyards, hidden staircases, and shadowed alleyways, housed lives that were deliberately hidden. Lovers met in secret, conspirators whispered in hushed tones, and children played games whose rules were known only to them. Within these spaces, tensions escalated quietly but inexorably, with small acts of defiance or betrayal capable of spiraling into consequences far beyond imagination. The city itself seemed alive, watching, waiting for the next small drama to unfold. And then, sometimes, the extraordinary pierced the ordinary. A sudden scream, a thrown stone, the collapse of a poorly built upper floor, these incidents shattered the rhythm of daily life, forcing citizens to confront the fragility of their existence. Yet, even in chaos, human resilience emerged. The scent of bread baking in brick ovens mingled with the tang of smoke from outdoor hearths, drifting through streets alive with commerce and chatter. In every corner of the city, life revolved around sustenance, yet obtaining it was never as simple as walking to a store and paying a price. The daily rituals of feeding oneself and one's family demanded skill, knowledge, and careful negotiation with the unpredictable rhythms of nature, human greed, and misfortune. Even the simplest meal, bread, cheese, or a bit of roasted fish, carried with it stories of labor, struggle, and ingenuity, revealing as much about Roman society as the grand temples or senate chambers that historians so often glorify. At the edge of a bustling market, a young baker carefully inspected the flour delivered that morning. He sniffed it, kneaded it between his hands, feeling for any trace of dampness or impurity that might ruin the day's bread. Each loaf had to be perfect. A single burnt or misshapen bread could mean an angry customer, a lost coin, or even whispered rumors that his skill was waning. Behind him, a group of apprentices rolled dough with fervent energy, laughing quietly at one another's mistakes, but aware that mistakes carried consequences. Bread was not merely sustenance, it was survival, currency, and pride all at once. In nearby alleys, water carriers balanced heavy amphorae on their shoulders, threading through the crowd with precise care. Water was precious, and any spill meant not only lost labor but potential reprimand from a demanding employer. Their route traced the veins of the city itself, touching homes, markets, and temples, giving them a unique vantage point over the lives of the citizens. They witnessed arguments, clandestine meetings, and fleeting gestures of tenderness, becoming silent chroniclers of the city's hidden stories. The simple act of carrying water became a delicate negotiation between patience, vigilance, and quiet endurance, and sometimes the smallest misstep, a stumble, a dropped jug, could ripple into chaos for both carrier and household alike. Meanwhile, in the outskirts of the city, farmers worked tirelessly under the relentless sun, tending olive groves and wheat fields. Their hands were cracked and calloused, their skin darkened by the sun, yet they labored with unwavering dedication because each harvest carried the weight of survival for their families and their city. A single failed crop could mean hunger, debt, or desperation. They bartered what little they had at the market, navigating fickle buyers and unpredictable prices. These farmers were invisible to most, their existence often reduced to statistics or passing references, yet they were the lifeblood of Rome, sustaining millions through toil that often went unnoticed and unappreciated. Inside modest homes, women managed kitchens, grinding grain into flour, fermenting wine, and carefully rationing herbs and spices to extend the life of meager meals. Their lives were governed by precise schedules and resource management, a quiet form of mastery that demanded creativity and resilience. One woman carefully stirred a pot of porridge, her mind elsewhere, pondering a sick child or an overdue payment for last week's grain. She moved with efficiency born of necessity, yet her eyes revealed a depth of fear and hope that she rarely expressed aloud. Within these kitchens, survival was an art form, balancing nourishment, thrift, and emotional labor in a society that often overlooked women's vital contributions. But food and water were only part of the struggle. Work was a constant companion, whether in the bustling markets, the blacksmith's forge, or the potter's courtyard. Labor demanded both strength and cunning, artisans needed skill to craft objects of value, merchants needed strategy to survive competitive markets, and laborers needed endurance to maintain the rhythm of life. Failure meant not only loss of income but potential social humiliation or even punishment, a reminder that the stakes of ordinary life were perilously high. A blacksmith, hammering red-hot iron, could burn his hand in a single miscalculated strike, altering the day, or perhaps the month, for his family. Each small decision in these daily labors carried consequences that rippled across the social fabric. In this delicate balance, secrets and small acts of subversion quietly unfolded. A merchant might siphon a little extra grain to sell on the side, a cook might hoard the choicest scraps for her family, a child might slip unseen coins into a pocket. These minor acts of defiance were not always criminal, they were expressions of agency in a world that demanded constant compliance. And yet, they carried tension, the threat of discovery, the potential for punishment, and the knowledge that even survival could come at moral or social cost. Every small transaction, every shared meal, every whispered negotiation was a high-stakes endeavor in which ordinary Romans had to navigate danger and opportunity simultaneously. In this world, ordinary objects carried extraordinary significance. A simple loaf of bread could sustain a family for a day or be the currency for an important favor. As the sun climbed higher, the city's streets began to hum with a different rhythm, a cadence dictated not by labor or commerce, but by ritual and devotion. Temples and shrines rose modestly among the apartments and markets, their stones weathered by centuries yet imbued with silent authority. The scent of incense and offerings drifted through narrow alleys, mingling with the aroma of cooking fires and the occasional whiff of waste. Every corner of the city carried a spiritual undertone, a quiet reminder that life, in all its unpredictability, was shadowed by forces seen and unseen. For the Romans, belief was not optional, it was the lens through which danger, fortune, and morality were interpreted. In a small household near the Forum, a young priestess moved with careful reverence, tending a shrine to Vesta. Her hands trembled slightly as she lit the oil lamp, mindful of the exact proportions of oil and flame, knowing that a single misstep could be interpreted as an ill omen. Her eyes flicked toward the family's bread baking on the hearth, calculating whether the household gods would bless their efforts, or turn away in silent disapproval. Each ritual, however minute, carried stakes far beyond superstition. Illness, crop failure, or the loss of coins could be blamed on the neglect of the gods, and the priestess's careful observance of rites was as much about survival as it was about piety. Beyond the private shrines, the streets themselves were alive with religious observance. Merchants paused briefly before their shops, dropping small coins into bronze altars dedicated to Fortuna, the goddess of chance, praying for safe transactions. A group of children darted past, laughing, each tossing a pebble into a shallow basin as a playful nod to household spirits. For the plebeians, ritual was woven into the fabric of daily life, an invisible layer of structure and protection against the chaos that seemed to lurk around every corner. For the elite, ceremonial practice was also a performance, a public assertion of wealth, influence, and divine favor. But whether rich or poor, all Romans understood the tension inherent in these acts. Devotion could not guarantee safety, yet neglect could invite disaster. Superstition thrived in this environment. A black cat crossing the street could prompt hurried prayers. The sound of a falling tile might be interpreted as a warning from the gods. Strange omens appeared in the heavens, comets, eclipses, or unusual storms, and they were recorded meticulously, analyzed for hidden meanings, their implications weighing heavily on both public and private decisions. Ordinary Romans, with limited control over the forces that shaped their lives, sought security in ritual, repeating the same prayers, gestures, and offerings day after day. And yet, there was an inherent suspense in each action. Would the gods heed their entreaties, or was disaster inevitable? At the larger temples, priests and priestesses performed ceremonies with elaborate precision. A public sacrifice at the temple of Jupiter drew citizens in waves, their eyes reflecting both devotion and apprehension. The ritual was more than spectacle, it was an attempt to impose order on a world teeming with uncertainty. Families observed from the sidelines, hoping for protection, prosperity, and guidance, while behind the scenes, the priests interpreted signs that could change the fate of entire households or districts. Even the smallest misstep in ritual practice could carry grave consequences, whispered warnings of wrath that could strike anywhere, at any time. Personal devotion intersected with public power in ways both subtle and profound. A wealthy merchant might fund a temple renovation not purely from piety, but to curry favor with local magistrates, ensuring smooth business and social influence. The plebeian craftsman might secretly bribe a temple attendant to offer prayers on his behalf, a quiet act of subversion within the constraints of faith. In this city, belief was both a protective shield and a tool for negotiation, a tension-filled dance between devotion, fear, and social strategy. Yet religion was also a theater of human emotion, where hope, despair, and cunning intertwined. A young woman placed an offering in the fountain of a minor goddess, whispering for the recovery of a sick sibling, her voice trembling with urgency. Across the forum, a man muttered words under his breath, attempting to ward off misfortune while eyeing the coins in his purse, wondering if the gods would favor him today. Faith carried with it a suspense unlike any other, the stakes were life itself, and the consequences of success or failure were immediate and tangible. Amid these layers of ritual and belief, the city's undercurrents revealed secrets and fears that were otherwise invisible. Superstitions provided explanations for the unexplainable, why a child fell ill, why a shipment of grain spoiled, why a neighbor suddenly vanished. They also offered opportunity. Merchants could exploit fear to increase profits, fortune-tellers could gain influence, and cunning individuals could manipulate appearances of divine favor to their own advantage. Religion was simultaneously comforting and dangerous, a framework for survival that also concealed uncertainty, deception, and human ambition. And then, as dusk approached and shadows stretched across the marble and stone, the city seemed to hold its breath. Lamps flickered in the courtyards, incense smoke coiled like ethereal serpents, and whispers of prayer mingled with the distant clatter of carts returning home. The delicate balance between devotion and danger, faith and superstition, hung in the air like a taut thread. Within this fragile equilibrium, lives were shaped, fortunes were made or lost, and secrets were whispered only to the gods. As the night settled in, one could sense the tension that pervaded daily existence. Rituals and prayers were not mere formalities, they were lifelines, each imbued with suspense, hope, and an unspoken fear that misfortune could strike at any moment. The lives of ordinary Romans were entwined with these invisible forces, their every action, decision, and moment of devotion potentially carrying profound consequences. It was in this world, suspended between the seen and the unseen, that the next layer of Roman life, the intimate, hidden struggles of love, desire, and betrayal, was quietly taking shape, waiting to surface with all the tension and drama that human hearts could produce. Beneath the shadows of bustling streets and towering temples, another layer of life unfolded, far more intimate and perilous than the public rituals or daily labor. Here, in quiet courtyards, hidden rooms, and dimly lit alleys, Romans navigated the complex and often dangerous terrain of love, desire, and betrayal. Social rules were strict, and reputation was fragile, a single misstep could bring disgrace, ruin, or worse. Yet human desire proved more insistent than law or convention, and the tension between societal expectation and personal longing shaped the rhythms of everyday life in ways that few historians could ever fully capture. In a modest insula, a young woman named Livia carefully adjusted her veil, hiding the traces of worry and hope that flickered across her face. She had been promised to a merchant twice her age, a union arranged for social stability rather than affection. Her heart, however, belonged elsewhere, to a scribe who delivered messages in the forum, whose hands trembled when he wrote her name in secret letters. Every glance, every stolen moment between them carried the risk of exposure. Gossip traveled swiftly through the narrow streets, and discovery could mean the abrupt end of both love and social standing. The suspense of these secret liaisons was tangible, a quiet tension that hovered like a shadow over every decision. Not all desires were innocent. Affairs between the powerful and the powerless were common, creating webs of manipulation and hidden advantage. A senator might court the daughter of a wealthy merchant, ostensibly for love, but in reality to secure influence, a future ally, or access to information. Servants, slaves, and freedmen were often drawn into these tangled relationships, sometimes willing participants, sometimes victims of circumstance, their fates bound by secrecy and fear. Each interaction carried consequences, and the city itself seemed to watch with silent judgment, its stones absorbing whispers and half-spoken threats. Family dynamics, too, were a theater of suspense and emotion. Parents arranged marriages, settled disputes, and negotiated alliances, all while guarding their own ambitions and secrets. Siblings vied for attention, favor, and inheritance, sometimes resorting to subtle manipulation or outright betrayal. In one modest home, a father's stern gaze concealed fear that his eldest daughter's secret romance could undermine the household's fragile stability, while his wife whispered prayers to the household gods for guidance, hoping for protection yet aware that fate was never entirely within their control. Every conversation, every gesture, carried stakes that could echo through generations, binding families to invisible rules and delicate balances of power. Romance and secrecy were not confined to the elite. In crowded marketplaces, taverns, and shared courtyards, ordinary Romans sought companionship and affection, often at considerable risk. A young baker might slip a morsel of bread to a beloved, their hands brushing in a fleeting moment of tenderness, eyes flicking nervously to ensure no one witnessed the gesture. In back alleys, whispered conversations could carry both passion and danger, the thrill of desire entwined with the threat of social exposure, theft, or violence. Human emotion, love, longing, jealousy, and fear, became a high-stakes game, an invisible tension that could erupt with devastating consequences. Secret alliances were sometimes forged for survival as much as affection. A woman might protect a lover by misleading her family or neighbors, a man might conceal debts or crimes to maintain a connection. In a world where social networks determined opportunity, protection, and status, love was rarely purely romantic, it was entwined with strategy, risk, and calculation. Every clandestine encounter, every unspoken word, became a thread in a web of intrigue, pulling individuals deeper into a maze of tension that was at once emotional, social, and sometimes lethal. The city itself seemed to conspire with these hidden dramas. Narrow staircases and secluded courtyards provided refuge, shadowed corners offered both opportunity and danger. But even in the most carefully chosen hiding places, a single misstep, a whispered rumor overheard, a servant who observed too closely, a glance caught by a neighbor, could expose the secret world that thrived just beneath the surface of daily life. This constant interplay of concealment and revelation infused ordinary actions with suspense, as individuals navigated desires that could either enrich or ruin their existence. And yet, these personal dramas were not only about danger, they were a testament to resilience and courage. Lovers took risks because the alternative was emptiness, parents navigated difficult choices because the stakes were too high to ignore. Even small acts, a secret meeting in a garden, a hastily written note, a hand extended in quiet affection, were imbued with emotional intensity, illuminating the human capacity for hope, loyalty, and defiance in the face of social constraints. Each story was a microcosm of the broader city, reflecting the tension, unpredictability, and beauty of life itself. Some secrets, however, were impossible to contain. A single betrayal could shatter a carefully constructed household, an exposure could ruin reputations overnight, and a misjudged decision could ripple outward with consequences far beyond the individuals involved. In one household, the daughter's secret correspondence with her scribe was discovered, not through malice, but by the accidental glance of a servant who misinterpreted the letters. What had been private became public, forcing swift negotiation, desperate explanations, and quiet calculations to prevent catastrophe. The city's networks of gossip were as powerful as any law, and the consequences of revelation could be as devastating as punishment from the magistrate. Despite these risks, desire persisted. It thrived in small acts of defiance, whispered promises, and fleeting glances. The intensity of secrecy heightened emotion, creating suspense not only for those involved but for those who observed, as the city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether love, ambition, or deception would triumph. It was a world in which human emotion was both a weapon and a sanctuary, where courage and cunning were required not only to survive but to connect, to resist, and to assert one's humanity against the constraints of society. By the time the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the streets, the tension of these private worlds intertwined with the city's larger rhythms. Secret loves, betrayals, and ambitions pulsed quietly beneath the surface, influencing decisions, shaping relationships, and subtly altering the course of daily life. What began as intimate longing could escalate into public scandal, demonstrating the precarious balance between desire and consequence. In this hidden realm, Romans lived intensely, vulnerably, and passionately, their lives a tapestry of human emotion that would leave echoes across centuries, waiting for archaeologists, historians, and storytellers to uncover the fragile, brilliant truths of everyday existence. The city's heartbeat, so vibrant during the day, changed subtly as shadows lengthened and the sunlight softened, casting narrow streets and alleys into muted shades of gray. Within these dim corridors, the ordinary rhythms of life were interrupted by a different kind of tension, one fueled by fear, ambition, and the fragile grip of law and order. Crime, violence, and deception were woven into the fabric of Roman existence as persistently as the hum of the marketplace or the scent of fresh bread. Here, the stakes were no longer only survival or love, but life itself. In the crowded forum, a pickpocket moved with a practiced ease, slipping his hand into an unsuspecting merchant's purse. It was a skill honed over years of necessity and observation, a twitch of an elbow, a distraction in conversation, a subtle brush of clothing. Each motion carried risk. A miscalculation could mean public humiliation, a beating, or imprisonment. Yet the payoff was immediate and tangible: coins to buy food, to bribe an official, to maintain a fragile existence on the fringes of society. In this world, ingenuity and cunning were as vital as muscle and endurance, and the line between survival and moral compromise blurred with every act of petty theft. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit tavern tucked away from the main streets, whispers of conspiracy and betrayal rippled through the smoky air. Merchants discussed hidden debts, rivalries, and underhanded deals, their voices low but insistent. A thief and a street urchin plotted the next heist, exchanging knowledge of guard rotations and vulnerable homes. Nearby, a magistrate met discreetly with a wealthy family, negotiating influence and favors that might determine the outcome of disputes or the resolution of criminal accusations. In these interactions, power, fear, and deception intertwined, and every participant understood that one misstep could reverberate across the city, altering lives permanently. Crime was not limited to petty theft or secret scheming. Violence could erupt suddenly, turning the city's narrow streets into a stage for bloodshed. Brawls over debts, insults, or perceived slights were not uncommon. The clang of a blade, the swing of a cudgel, or a desperate struggle for survival could change the trajectory of ordinary lives in an instant. Citizens navigated the streets with caution, aware that even minor provocations might escalate into lethal encounters. Each alleyway, each corner, each shadow held the potential for danger, and the city itself seemed complicit, amplifying suspense with its labyrinthine layout and crowded spaces where the unsuspecting could be ambushed without warning. Among these dangerous currents, certain individuals operated with remarkable audacity. A magistrate, entrusted with upholding law and order, could manipulate verdicts for personal gain, favoring wealthy clients while condemning the vulnerable. A thief might orchestrate a daring robbery under the guise of night, disappearing into the city's folds before the authorities could react. A citizen might collude with others to conceal a crime, balancing fear and opportunity as they navigated the fragile networks of trust and suspicion. The interplay of morality, survival, and power created an environment rife with suspense, where the consequences of a single action could escalate beyond expectation. Even the law was a weapon, wielded as much for advantage as for justice. Trials in the city could be swift, brutal, and public, drawing crowds eager for spectacle and gossip. The accused faced scrutiny not only for the act itself but for character, reputation, and association, as the outcome of a trial could shift social and economic fortunes overnight. Families were drawn into legal battles, friends became enemies, and the line between innocence and guilt often blurred under pressure, leaving ordinary citizens constantly aware of how vulnerable their positions were within the intricate web of urban society. Some crimes were subtle, hidden beneath layers of appearance and influence. Merchants might tamper with weights or grain supplies, enriching themselves at the expense of unsuspecting customers. Servants could quietly manipulate households for small advantages, or gather information to sell to the highest bidder. Even seemingly minor acts, a stolen loaf, a falsified ledger, a whispered rumor, could have cascading effects, unsettling lives and creating tension that threaded through the city's daily pulse. Every individual's choices could ripple outward, creating suspense and uncertainty that shaped the community in ways invisible yet deeply felt. Violence and crime were not always calculated, chance and circumstance played a merciless role. A sudden confrontation on a crowded street could escalate beyond control. A jealous spouse might strike out in a moment of fury, leaving permanent consequences for both victim and perpetrator. A confrontation over unpaid debts could turn lethal in seconds. Romans lived with an acute awareness of the fragility of their lives, knowing that even the simplest miscalculation, a harsh word, a misread signal, an unguarded coin, could lead to ruin. It was a world in which vigilance and intuition were as critical as courage, and where ordinary actions could have extraordinary consequences. Amid this tension, alliances were forged and broken with equal rapidity. A thief might collaborate with a corrupt official to protect a stolen stash, a merchant might bribe a guard to avoid penalties, a family might conceal a violent act to preserve reputation and inheritance. Trust was both precious and perilous, and misjudgments could lead to betrayal, imprisonment, or death. In this way, daily life was a constant negotiation with danger, a high-stakes game in which survival required cunning, observation, and sometimes a willingness to embrace moral ambiguity. And yet, within this environment of risk and intrigue, moments of heroism and courage emerged. A citizen might intervene to protect a neighbor from attack, risking injury or social backlash. A blacksmith could use skill and strength to defend a family from a gang of thieves. Even small acts of defiance, a refusal to pay bribe, the recovery of stolen property, the exposure of corruption, demonstrated the resilience and agency of individuals navigating a perilous urban world. These acts, while fleeting, left lasting impressions, both on the community and on the invisible narrative threads of the city's history. By nightfall, the city's streets were quieter, but not safer. Shadows lengthened, and dangers shifted to more hidden forms, robberies in unlit alleys, secret plotting behind closed doors, and whispered threats that carried the weight of life-altering consequences. The city itself seemed alive, aware, and unforgiving, a stage upon which every citizen, from merchant to magistrate to slave, played a precarious role. Crime, violence, and law intertwined in a constant dance of tension, revealing the fragility and resilience of life in Rome. In this complex, dangerous world, survival depended not only on skill and strength, but also on observation, foresight, and sometimes sheer luck. Each day was a calculated negotiation with forces both human and unseen, and every choice carried the potential to elevate or destroy. Life in ancient Rome was not merely about labor, ritual, or affection, it was a delicate balance of opportunity and peril, and within that balance, the hidden stories of courage, deception, and human ingenuity quietly unfolded. The city was alive with suspense, a place where the ordinary and extraordinary collided, where secrets, crimes, and human ambition shaped lives with relentless intensity, setting the stage for the next chapter, the hidden, often silenced lives of slaves and servants who bore witness to, and sometimes defied, the dangers of this urban web. The city of Rome, for all its grandeur and bustling streets, harbored a darker rhythm behind its public ceremonies and marketplaces. Justice, which to outsiders might have seemed a structured system of laws and punishments, was in truth a labyrinth of politics, personal vendettas, and human error. In the shadow of the Forum, magistrates held their courts with faces carefully composed, yet behind their eyes lingered ambitions and fears that could tip the scales of fate. The accused, whether a struggling plebeian or a wealthy merchant, often found themselves ensnared in a game far larger than mere guilt or innocence. One such case involved a young servant girl, barely 16, accused of theft in her master's household. Her name was Livia, and she had grown up in the narrow alleys of Rome, her life shaped by poverty and the quiet survival skills that came with it. She claimed innocence, insisting she had merely been in the wrong place at the wrong time, yet the evidence seemed stacked against her. Coins were missing, items gone, and witnesses, neighbors loyal to her master, spoke with unwavering certainty. In the court, her small frame seemed to shrink further under the weight of scrutiny, her voice trembling as she recounted her daily routine, each word measured, each pause scrutinized. The magistrate, a man named Gaius Flavius, listened attentively but not without suspicion. He was a man whose reputation for fairness masked an undercurrent of pragmatism. His decisions often favored those with influence, and in Rome, influence was a currency more valuable than gold. The trial revealed the complex interplay between law and social status. Livia's master, a mid-ranking merchant with connections to influential senators, whispered subtle suggestions of guilt at every turn. The witnesses, though ostensibly impartial, could not escape the sway of social pressure. Even the scribes recording testimony sometimes inserted their own interpretations, coloring the narrative in ways that only the most attentive could discern. As the audience leaned in, the tension mounted. Every whispered rumor, every cautious glance between spectators and officials, hinted at a society where justice was negotiable, where morality could be bent under the weight of power. But justice in Rome was not only a question of influence, it was also public spectacle. Punishments were carried out in open spaces, and the fear of humiliation often proved as powerful as the law itself. The courts were stages upon which the city watched, the crowd's reaction sometimes shaping outcomes more than the facts presented. Livia, accused and trembling, felt the eyes of dozens, perhaps hundreds, burning into her very soul. Each murmur of agreement or dissent carried the potential to sway Gaius Flavius's judgment. And yet, amidst the rigid ritual of accusation and defense, subtle inconsistencies emerged. A witness hesitated, a detail contradicted another account, and for a moment, the air seemed to shift, as if the very foundations of certainty wavered. It was then that Gaius decided to investigate further, not content to simply rely on appearances. He sent for servants and neighbors, questioning them separately, looking for cracks in their stories. In Rome, the law demanded both proof and persuasion, and in cases like Livia's, where human motives could not be quantified, the magistrate's intuition became almost as crucial as the evidence itself. He pondered the missing coins, the layout of the household, and the timing of events, each fact a thread that could unravel or reinforce the narrative. Livia's fear was palpable. She understood that her life depended not just on her truth but on how convincingly it could be interpreted. Meanwhile, Gaius's own moral compass was under strain. Reports of bribes and threats circulated quietly through the forum, whispered in the shadows. Senators and wealthy merchants had their interests at heart, and even a magistrate with integrity could not ignore the undercurrent of danger. A wrong decision might not only ruin an innocent life but also place the magistrate himself in jeopardy. The stakes were immense, and as Gaius weighed each testimony, the audience sensed the tension, the invisible threads connecting power, justice, and human frailty. The climax of the investigation arrived in the form of a minor, almost overlooked detail. A small scrap of cloth, found in the garden where the theft allegedly occurred, carried a mark that contradicted the master's testimony. Gaius examined it personally, considering the possibility that someone else might have had access to the coins. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, one that implicated a young stable hand, motivated by desperation rather than malice, who had acted in secrecy while Livia remained an unwitting scapegoat. The revelation shifted the narrative entirely, forcing the court and the spectators to confront uncomfortable truths. Justice could be manipulated, and the innocent could suffer while the guilty walked freely, if only for a moment. Yet even with this revelation, the aftermath was far from tidy. The stable hand was punished, but not without sympathy from parts of the crowd who understood his motives. Livia was acquitted, yet her relief was tempered by the memory of the fear and humiliation she endured. And Gaius Flavius, though praised for his diligence, returned to his duties carrying the quiet weight of moral compromise, the knowledge that in a city like Rome, truth was often a fragile construct, easily bent by human desires and societal pressures. As the court emptied and the crowd dispersed, the shadows of the forum lengthened, casting long fingers over the cobblestones. Stories like Livia's were countless, scattered across the city, each a thread in a vast tapestry of human struggle and ambition. The law, the magistrates, and the punishments formed only one layer of Rome's reality. Beneath it lay a web of secrets, betrayals, and small acts of courage or cowardice that would never be recorded in history books but lived vividly in the memories of those who endured them. And it was in this tension, between the public ritual and the private truth, that the haunting essence of Rome's justice lingered, forever balancing on the knife edge of morality and survival. Rumors had always flowed through the streets of Rome like an invisible current, seeping into every corner, whispered behind closed doors and in the bustling markets. But as the sun dipped low behind the marble temples, shadows stretched across the forum and the alleys alike, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Something was stirring beneath the surface, a tension that the citizens could feel but could not name. The thefts, secret affairs, and minor betrayals of daily life were now converging into a far more sinister current, one that threatened to upend the fragile equilibrium of the city. It began with a whisper, an unexpected disappearance that would ignite speculation, fear, and panic. The victim was Marcus Valerius, a mid-level merchant known for both his wealth and his ruthlessness. Rumors suggested that Marcus had angered someone in the upper echelons of Roman society, but no one could pinpoint who. Some said it was a matter of business rivalry, others hinted at matters of the heart, an affair gone wrong. On a warm summer evening, Marcus simply vanished. His home was left untouched, his accounts were open, and his most trusted servants swore they had seen nothing out of the ordinary. But Rome was a city of eyes everywhere, and gossip quickly grew into a story that was impossible to ignore. Citizens whispered that he had been silenced for knowing too much, that shadows in his life were now conspiring to strike with lethal precision. The investigation began almost immediately, led by Gaius Flavius, whose reputation from previous cases lent him the authority to probe such sensitive matters. As he stepped into Marcus's villa, he could feel the air thick with tension, the servants shifting uneasily, neighbors watching from behind shutters, and the faint scent of unease clinging to the walls. Every detail mattered, the position of furniture, footprints in the dust, a half-burned candle. Each clue seemed minor in isolation, yet in the larger puzzle of intrigue and suspicion, they might be the thread that unraveled the truth. Gaius was aware that in Rome, appearances were often deceiving. A loyal servant could lie out of fear, a neighbor could exaggerate a story to curry favor, and even family members might conceal motives to protect their own. Suspicion spread like wildfire. Marcus's wife, Julia, appeared composed in public but trembled behind closed doors. She insisted she had no idea where her husband had gone, yet her hurried glances and whispered conversation suggested otherwise. Was she protecting someone, or herself? Meanwhile, the Merchants' Guild murmured amongst themselves, hinting at financial entanglements, debts, and hidden rivalries that could have driven Marcus's disappearance. The entire city seemed to lean into the mystery, sensing that this was not a mere case of a man gone missing but the beginning of something far more dangerous, a web of deceit that could ensnare anyone. Clues emerged slowly, each one more puzzling than the last. A footpath leading out of the villa's garden showed signs of hurried passage, but there were no footprints leading to or from the street. A torn fragment of cloth, discovered under a bench near the forum, carried a mark that did not belong to any known servant or household member. And then there were the letters, carefully hidden beneath the floorboards, containing cryptic messages that hinted at betrayal, secret alliances, and possible blackmail. As Gaius examined these, he could almost hear Marcus's voice in the margins, warning of dangers unseen, leaving breadcrumbs that only the most meticulous investigator could follow. Each new discovery deepened the sense of unease. The citizens of Rome, already accustomed to intrigue and crime, began to murmur of curses and ill omens. Some whispered that the gods themselves had grown angry, punishing Marcus for his transgressions, while others insisted that mortal enemies were at work, cloaked in the guise of ordinary life. Gaius remained grounded, yet he could not deny the mounting tension, each suspect seemed both innocent and guilty, each alibi plausible yet fragile. He began to realize that solving this case would not simply be about finding a missing man, it would require peeling back layers of human motivation, uncovering secrets that many wished would remain hidden forever. The investigation's turning point came when a small group of neighbors reported seeing a shadowy figure moving through the marketplace late at night. No one could identify the figure, yet the descriptions were eerily consistent, tall, cloaked, and carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. This led Gaius to suspect that Marcus's disappearance was not random but orchestrated, premeditated, a calculated move executed by someone intimately familiar with his routines. The city's web of relationships suddenly seemed like a network of snares, every merchant, every servant, and every politician a potential actor in a drama that could have deadly consequences. Gaius pressed further, interrogating witnesses in private chambers to avoid the spectacle of the public eye. Each session revealed contradictions and hidden truths. Julia, under pressure, admitted to knowing more than she initially revealed, details about Marcus's dealings with the senators, secret loans, and illicit trades that could ruin powerful people if exposed. The servants, once fearful and silent, began to share whispers of clandestine meetings in hidden courtyards and late-night rendezvous that suggested Marcus may have stumbled upon a dangerous secret. As the threads of the story wove together, the stakes became frighteningly clear. Marcus had been caught between powerful factions, each capable of bending the law to their advantage. The city itself seemed to pulse with tension, a living entity aware of the dangers lurking within its streets. Markets emptied faster as rumors spread, neighborhoods whispered, and even the temples, usually places of sanctuary, could not escape the reach of intrigue. Rome had always been a city of spectacle, but now the spectacle was one of fear and suspicion. Who could be trusted? Was Marcus alive, hidden away by friends, or had darker forces already claimed him? The uncertainty gnawed at every witness, every observer, leaving the entire city poised on the edge of revelation. And yet, in the midst of fear and speculation, the first undeniable evidence surfaced. A hidden chamber beneath one of Marcus's warehouses revealed a cache of documents and valuables, suggesting that his disappearance was no ordinary crime. Letters indicated threats, subtle manipulations, and a network of conspirators spanning the city's elite. It became increasingly clear that this was not merely a matter of a man gone missing, but a tale of betrayal, ambition, and deadly consequence. Each layer peeled back revealed another secret, another twist, forcing Gaius and the city to confront uncomfortable truths about loyalty, morality, and the lengths to which humans would go to protect power. As the sun rose over the city, painting the forum in golden light, Rome remained a city of shadows and whispers. Marcus's fate was still unknown, yet the investigation had begun to expose the hidden machinery of deceit that shaped the lives of all who dwelled there. The citizens could sense that the story was far from over, that every familiar face might conceal motives, every ally could be a traitor, and every answer uncovered would lead only to deeper questions. It was in this delicate, suspenseful balance that Rome's true nature revealed itself, a city where whispers could topple lives, where secrets carried the weight of survival, and where the pursuit of truth demanded courage, cunning, and a willingness to face the unimaginable. The streets of Rome seemed unusually silent as Gaius Flavius continued his investigation. The city, usually vibrant with the clash of merchants, the laughter of children, and the distant echoes of soldiers, now felt like a stage set for secrets and shadows. Every corner seemed to conceal hidden eyes, every alleyway a potential witness, or a trap. The disappearance of Marcus Valerius had become more than a single mystery, it was the thread that threatened to unravel a web of corruption, betrayal, and long-buried secrets, reaching higher into the echelons of power than anyone had dared to imagine. Gaius began to piece together the story from fragments, inconsistencies, and whispers. His approach was meticulous. He revisited witnesses, examining their testimonies with an almost surgical precision, looking for micro-expressions, pauses, and subtle contradictions. The Merchants' Guild members were first to be interrogated, their polished words masking nervous glances. Some claimed ignorance, some feigned surprise, yet beneath the veneer of civility, Gaius could sense fear, and with fear came honesty, though often in small, reluctant doses. A merchant named Quintus finally admitted to overhearing a conversation between Marcus and a senator, in which threats were made, debts were manipulated, and alliances shifted like sand. This small revelation hinted at a far deeper conspiracy than a mere disappearance. Marcus had become entangled in political intrigue that threatened powerful individuals. The more Gaius uncovered, the more precarious the situation became. He learned of secret meetings in secluded gardens, of coded messages hidden in plain sight, and of servants and street urchins who had witnessed more than they realized. One young boy, a street vendor's son named Tullius, recounted seeing a cloaked figure carrying a bundle late at night toward the Tiber River. Tullius's story, at first dismissed as fantasy, gained credibility when fragments of Marcus's clothing were discovered near the riverbank. Each clue was a step deeper into the labyrinth of Rome's hidden life, where loyalty was rare, and every truth carried the weight of potential danger. Meanwhile, Julia, Marcus's wife, became an increasingly complex character in the unfolding drama. Her outward composure remained, but Gaius detected fissures in her account. Through careful questioning, she revealed details of Marcus's secret dealings, arrangements with influential senators, shadowy trades, and alliances that blurred the line between legality and criminality. Julia's own motives were ambiguous. Was she attempting to protect her husband, manipulate the investigation for her advantage, or shield her own complicity? Gaius realized that understanding her true intentions would be critical, for she held keys to secrets others would kill to conceal. The investigation took a dangerous turn when Gaius discovered that threats were being sent to those cooperating with him. A merchant who had agreed to provide testimony received a veiled warning, written on a scrap of parchment: "Some stones are better left unturned." Fear gripped the city, as citizens began to whisper not only of Marcus's fate but of their own potential vulnerability. The thin veneer of order in Rome showed cracks, and it was evident that the forces behind Marcus's disappearance were watching, calculating, and willing to act. The very pursuit of truth had become a perilous endeavor. Gaius pressed on, driven by both duty and an unshakable sense of justice. He began tracing Marcus's financial dealings, revealing a network of debts, favors, and bribes that entangled several senators and wealthy merchants. Some debts were legitimate, some fictitious, and some dangerously manipulative. Marcus, it seemed, had stumbled upon evidence that could topple careers and destroy reputations. This revelation elevated the stakes. The investigation was no longer simply about finding a missing man, it had become a confrontation with power itself. And in Rome, power was rarely questioned without consequence. As the investigation intensified, Gaius also uncovered evidence of personal vendettas. A former business partner of Marcus, disgraced and humiliated years prior, emerged as a potential suspect. Letters were found in hidden compartments, detailing threats, grudges, and a simmering desire for revenge. Each new lead complicated the narrative, and the line between friend and foe blurred further. The city seemed to conspire with the investigation, offering glimpses of truth in small, enigmatic ways: a discarded glove, a hastily erased footprint, a whispered confession from a frightened servant. Rome itself became a character, its streets and alleys alive with tension, suspense, and hidden knowledge. The turning point arrived when Gaius discovered the involvement of a shadowy group operating in the underbelly of the city. They were neither fully criminal nor entirely political, but a mix of both, a network of individuals who dealt in secrets, influence, and manipulation. Marcus, whether through curiosity or misfortune, had crossed paths with them. Their presence explained the careful orchestration of his disappearance and the attempts to intimidate witnesses. Understanding this clandestine organization became crucial. Gaius knew that uncovering their methods, motives, and connections would be key to resolving the case. Yet, each step toward the truth brought greater danger, as the city's silent watchers grew increasingly aware of his inquiries. Amidst this complexity, human drama flourished. Witnesses wrestled with conscience and fear, balancing loyalty to friends, family, and employers against the risk of exposure. Julia faced her own moral crucible, torn between protecting Marcus, safeguarding her own position, and navigating a dangerous political landscape. Even Gaius, guided by principle, was forced to acknowledge the limits of the law. In Rome, morality was malleable, and justice was often negotiable. The investigator's journey became as much about understanding human nature as it was about unraveling a disappearance, a realization that heightened the narrative's suspense and emotional resonance. As days turned into nights, each revelation seemed to both clarify and obscure the truth. The shadowy figure Tullius had seen now connected to the clandestine organization, the financial records hinted at blackmail, and Marcus's personal connections revealed tangled loyalties. Every layer peeled back seemed to expose yet another secret, another danger lurking in plain sight. The citizens of Rome watched from a distance, sensing the tension but unable to grasp its full extent. Fear, anticipation, and intrigue coalesced into an almost tangible presence, enveloping the city and those involved in the investigation. Finally, the investigation began to approach its most pivotal moment. Clues, witnesses, and careful deduction began to converge, pointing toward a shocking revelation: Marcus had been deliberately removed not by a single enemy, but by a network of conspirators whose reach extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. Each person implicated carried both motive and opportunity, yet the complexity of the scheme ensured that the final truth remained tantalizingly out of reach. Gaius, piecing together evidence with painstaking care, sensed the narrative's climax approaching, a moment that would expose betrayal, ambition, and the human capacity for both cruelty and courage. As the investigation unfolded, the audience, now fully immersed in the story, could feel the rising stakes. The search for Marcus Valerius had transformed from a simple inquiry into a high-stakes dance of morality, power, and survival. Every whispered secret, every overlooked detail, and every hesitant confession became part of a larger tapestry, one that illuminated the dangerous, beautiful, and often terrifying complexity of life in Rome. And in this tapestry, the investigator, the missing merchant, the witnesses, and the city itself were inextricably entwined, each playing a role in a drama that would leave consequences reverberating far beyond the forum and the marketplace. The city held its breath, poised on the edge of revelation. Each suspect, each clue, and each human decision was now a part of a delicate chain, capable of collapsing under the weight of one misstep. The tension was almost unbearable, the stakes impossibly high. And yet, it was precisely this tension, the intricate layering of human motives, societal pressures, and unseen forces, that made Rome a living, breathing story, capable of captivating not just those present in the streets, but anyone who dared to witness its dark, intricate drama. The investigation was far from over, but each step brought Gaius closer to a truth that would shock, disturb, and illuminate the very essence of life in the eternal city. The investigation had reached its tipping point, a precipice upon which the truth teetered, ready to tumble into the light. Rome, for all its grandeur, seemed to hold its breath. Every alley, every market stall, every shadowed corner of the forum had borne witness to whispers, secrets, and unseen movements that had led to this moment. Marcus Valerius's disappearance was no longer a mystery, it had become a mirror reflecting the darkest impulses of the city, exposing the ambitions, betrayals, and fears that thrummed beneath its surface. The threads of intrigue that Gaius Flavius had been tracing now converged, revealing a tapestry far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The first revelation struck like lightning. The shadowy figure who had been glimpsed moving near the Tiber was identified not as a common criminal or low-level servant, but as one of Marcus's closest associates, a man whose loyalty had long been assumed, but whose ambition had quietly grown over the years. This associate, a figure named Lucius, had carefully orchestrated Marcus's removal, manipulating debts, leveraging blackmail, and exploiting the secrets he had quietly accumulated. Lucius had calculated each step with meticulous precision, ensuring that suspicion fell elsewhere, that witnesses were silenced, and that the power vacuum created by Marcus's absence would benefit him most. The audacity of such betrayal stunned everyone involved, highlighting the precariousness of trust in a city where ambition often outweighed loyalty. Julia, Marcus's wife, faced her own crucible in the midst of these revelations. Her initial facade of composure had cracked, revealing the depth of her fear and her determination to protect her family's legacy. She confessed that she had known fragments of the scheme, though she insisted her silence had been driven by a desire to safeguard her children rather than out of complicity. Yet her revelations were essential. Through her testimony, Gaius pieced together the broader network of conspirators, merchants, minor senators, and even members of the city's elite, all intertwined in a shadowy web that spanned the very heart of Rome's power structure. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, creating a moral labyrinth in which every character navigated both their own desires and the relentless consequences of others' ambitions. The physical evidence reinforced these confessions. Hidden compartments in Marcus's warehouses revealed letters, contracts, and documents that mapped out the scope of the conspiracy. Some were mundane business arrangements, but many carried hints of blackmail, threats, and secret deals that implicated Lucius and several associates. Even the seemingly insignificant scraps of cloth, once overlooked, now fit into a larger puzzle, each fragment tracing a path that led inexorably to the truth. Gaius carefully catalogued each item, knowing that the proper arrangement of these fragments could reconstruct the narrative and expose those responsible for manipulating fate itself. As the truth crystallized, so too did the human cost. Witnesses and minor participants in the conspiracy were arrested, punished, or coerced into silence, each action leaving emotional scars and sowing mistrust throughout the city. Marcus, though alive, had endured confinement, fear, and uncertainty. His eventual release was not accompanied by celebration, but by a profound sense of loss, of innocence, trust, and a naive belief that loyalty or morality could offer protection in a world governed by ambition. The citizens who had observed these events were forced to confront the fragility of their own lives, realizing that even ordinary people could be swept into the undertow of power struggles far beyond their comprehension. The narrative's climax unfolded with both clarity and complexity. Lucius, confronted with undeniable evidence, attempted to justify his actions, claiming that Marcus had been naive, reckless, and a threat to his own survival. But his arguments carried little weight before public scrutiny or Gaius's meticulous reasoning. The confrontation, tense and deliberate, revealed the subtle workings of human ambition. Every word, hesitation, and attempt at persuasion was analyzed, exposing not just the crime but the hidden motives, fears, and desires that fueled it. Marcus's removal was not mere greed, it was the result of years of manipulation, quiet resentment, and careful strategy, a human drama played out in a city of spectacle and secrecy. Rome itself seemed to respond. Streets and markets buzzed with speculation, citizens whispered of loyalty and betrayal, while temples, usually sanctuaries, became places of reflection and inquiry. The revelations pressed upon the city, forcing it to reckon with the uncomfortable truth: justice was never absolute but a fragile balance maintained through courage, cunning, and circumstance. Even after the conspirators were identified, tension lingered. Alliances fractured, trust wavered, and citizens realized that ambition and secrecy interwove so completely that the surface never revealed the depths beneath. The emotional toll was profound. Relief, sorrow, anger, and understanding merged into a complex mosaic. Gaius Flavius reflected on the painstaking work, the questioning, the scrutiny, the balance of morality and law. The investigation had unraveled more than a disappearance, it revealed the essence of life in Rome, a city of public grandeur and private darkness. Marcus returned home forever changed, the citizens carried fragments of truth, and Lucius faced consequences, but the lesson extended beyond punishment. As night fell, moonlight cast long shadows across marble columns and cobblestone streets. The events surrounding Marcus's disappearance would echo through history, a story of ambition, betrayal, and human resilience. Every whispered rumor and subtle glance now carried weight, a reminder that even in the most ordered society, life was an intricate dance of power, secrecy, and the fragile threads holding it together.